ultimate goal is to work myself out of a job. Like my thought is that I'm not always going to be in this learner's life. So I can't
always write these social stories for them.
I'm not
especially
always
something that works for them.
Yes, exactly. So I'm not always going to be there to write the social story for them. Mm-hmm. So I try and teach parents like how I write social stories. Mm-hmm. So I will help with them like learning how to use Canva or PowerPoint. Because when you make social stories, yes, Canva is a great tool. That's what I love to use. But you can use PowerPoint. You can use like pictures and just write them yourself. So I try and like promote ways that they can write them at home.
Right.
And help generalize them. I also will show families like on YouTube. Like I know that it's not the most individualized social story, but on YouTube you can find like different topics, whether that be like coping strategies or like doing a challenging task, like going to the dentist or potty training. Like you can find some basic social stories.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Blossoming Together podcast. Today we're going to be talking about social stories. All right, so let's get right into our objectives. Yes. The first objective is addressing barriers to effective social stories.
Our second objective is evaluate digital social story tools.
All right, and make sure you're listening for our code words throughout the podcast today.
Awesome. All right, Yusra. So can you share your personal experience with using social stories in general?
So I feel like I've had I've written a few social stories, but I feel like no matter how many times you write them, it feels a little like nerve-wracking each time. It's mostly because, they're supposed to be tailored to the client, so to like the experience. So I feel like you're never writing the same one over and over again. Yeah. Versus like a lot of our programs, we've written the same ones a few times. Right. Versus a social story, I feel like it's different for each kid.
Each situation is like unique.
Different. Even going to the dentist, like I could write the same story 3 or 4 different times. Yeah. And each time it's going to look a little different.
Right. Like the dentist office is going to look different for various kids or
Or what issues they have, like at what barriers they have at like the dentist office looks a little different for each kid. Yeah. So I feel like every time I write one, it takes me way longer than it should.
I feel like it really triggers like our creative brain.
Yeah.
And
which I don't know. I'm not that creative.
Some days I can't find it.
No. And I'll sit there and be like, and I'll start looking for pictures and then I'll get a little sidetracked. Yeah. But that's my experience. Do you feel like you have like a good experience writing social stories?
Yeah. I feel like I've written a lot of social stories, like individualizing them. I a lot of times will use like Canva and try and like use pictures of the kids or like trying to take like what coping strategies and stuff that they're working on like within our sessions and implement them into the stories. Yeah. But sometimes it's really hard, or it's like I want to wait until the child has like mastered some skills before putting them into the social story. Right. But I'm like, wait, shouldn't I start the social story now and like work on it alongside each other?
It's hard deciding when to. I like the idea of doing them alongside each other.
Right.
Yeah. Because it's like the most beneficial.
Because then you can target, like, say, like your goal is for the child to imitate a coping strategy, like taking a deep breath or counting to 10. You can use reading the story as the learning opportunity rather than a contrived opportunity.
Right. And I always feel like you can pull it out and use it as a prompt too. Like, here, these are our coping strategies. Yes. Let's look in our book. Yeah. That's great. I love that.
So, I mean, I guess we talked about our experience with it. Can you describe a little bit exactly what a social story is supposed to be used for?
So, a social story is an individualized story that describes a specific social situation and circumstances. Right. Does that make sense? Am I forgetting anything you feel like?
I don't think so. Individualized to like what is needed for the learner. Right. But you hit that.
And it looks different. I feel like a lot of BCBAs now, they'll use like Canva, PowerPoint. Yes. And I know like old school people are like drawing pictures for their clients, right?
Yeah. Or like even I found that a lot of clinicians were having to just like, they didn't have the time to get individual or creative with the social story. Mm-hmm. So they just print one that already existed. Right. Which is like use our resources, but
that sucks too because it's not individualized.
Yes, like some of the best social stories should incorporate like that child themselves, like even like a picture of them or their preferences
or their interests. Yeah, like having something they find interesting in the social story. One of my supervisors had like given me a tip, like if you have a client, like a lot of our clients love numbers and letters, like having those just in the corner for like the pages, like something interesting for them to look at.
It's like the decoration of the page that
like
makes
it looks good.
And we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but like some of those prerequisite skills that increases the attending of the book. If like a child's not interested in them, they're not going to like look towards it and things like that.
I can see that. So what are the benefits of using a social story?
Social stories are used to like increase communication skills. They're a good modeling tool. They are very, like we've talked about probably 3 times already, is the customizable and individualization. And they're really good at promoting generalization.
Right.
Because you can work on something at the center so many times, but if it's in a story, you can like talk about it in different settings and then take that story to like a different setting as well.
And you would have the same language. Like I feel like I love it because it also helps the families keep that consistent language. If we've practiced something and we've used that verbiage, we can put it in the social story for the family to go home and take with them.
I agree. I like that. I think that's a really good benefit too. When you're thinking about a social story, like an ideal social story you're going to make, what are the key components you're looking for?
So that the language be that what the child can understand.
Yes.
So not writing it. Like, don't write a novel for like a 2 or 3-year-old.
There's no paragraphs on these pages.
There's no paragraphs. That's like, keep the language very simple. Write it in this perspective of the learner or the child.
Sure.
So we don't need to be like Johnny. Like, if your client's name is like Kenny, don't be writing a story about Johnny.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I like that. So individualizing it to the perspective of the child. When I'm thinking of that, I like to look, you can do it either in like first or third person. So it can either be in the perspective of like, I take a deep breath, or it can be in like your learner is Johnny. Johnny takes a deep breath.
Right.
And I like altering the perspective depending on like what's going to benefit the client.
I like that too. And one other thing is using visual supports within your story.
Please.
So if you're writing, like you're using a story that you've like made in Canva or PowerPoint, making sure you have pictures that are fun.
That associate with the topic.
Story, And like thinking about if you're using clip art pictures, like does it kind of match like that child's? Like,
this is something that's really hard, like culturally.
Culturally, I was writing a social story for one of my clients, like literally 3 weeks ago, and he is African American, and like looking for pictures that to like use
resemble that child
was so difficult. I kept finding little like blonde kids or like little like white kids, but I could not find like a boy that looked. I found one picture. And it was just like, it didn't have anything to do with the story. So that's
so frustrating.
I know.
It's discouraging.
And it's like, I'm not that good at like using.
You're like going to create your own clip art.
My own clip art, but like, and like try. Then you would have to pay for it. Like I found something where I'd have to pay like $10, $20 to get more people.
Which is sad. Like, come on, let's just broaden the demographic.
Like it should be easier to find some clip art pictures that represents everyone.
I found like sometimes when I run into those challenges, I'll take a picture of the client themselves and put them into the book because that's not fair for them to like be reading a story that's not going to relate to themselves.
And I feel I don't have like the stat on me or like, but like one of the things that you should be looking for like imitate like sorry,
that's okay.
Is that the photo should represent like the client.
Oh, like for like when you're doing like modeling skills.
Modeling skills. It should be like close in age to the client, resemble like the features of the client, some of that sort.
I think that's honestly like it should be the standard.
Yeah,
because we should be able to do that easily.
Awesome. All right, so what is your typical idea of a social? Is your typical idea of a social story a book with pictures, or are you using something else?
I think, actually, before we get into that, I want to give our first code word for our CEUs, just so I don't forget. So code word number 1 is going to be moving. MOVING, moving.
All right. So let's get into the next part the barriers to social stories.
Yes. So there are a lot of barriers when implementing a social story. So like social stories are great for some learners and we should really, really use them. But I find that barriers is like, one, does the child that you want to write a social story for have the ability to attend to a book for up to 5 minutes?
That's a hard one.
If we don't have that skill, we need to work on that skill first. Like, let's increase attending prior to introducing it because we don't want to spend, like we said, this is a resourceful time, like activity. It takes a lot of our time to make a social story. So we don't want to be working on this if they don't have the skills to like attend to it.
Right.
Something else is I want them to be able to follow simple instructions because a lot of times the social story is going to have like basic instructions in there.
What to do when you're in that situation, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or even like just getting them to come sit for the they should be able to like say, come here, let's sit and follow instructions that leads to that attending. And I want them to have general interest in books. Like if your learner hates books, maybe a social story isn't the best for them.
Right. So if a social story, like a book written social story isn't like the best tool for them, what can we do?
Yeah, I think when we typically think of social stories, we're thinking of these like little pamphlets with like words and pictures paired along them. But there are other ways that we can model social stories.
Right.
So one way, I really love video modeling. Have you used it in the past?
So I haven't necessarily used it for any clients per se, but it was like one of my last projects before I became BCBA.
Really?
And one of the barriers was it was hard to go and make like these videos. And what we tried to do is instead of adults being the models, we wanted other children to be the models.
Yeah.
And if I could do it again, I probably would have had like a younger sibling that could follow my instructions, be my models, but I don't know. I thought maybe like clients in the center.
I was going to say, so you were using clients in the center as your models. I mean, some of them could model for you.
Some of them were, but then like getting consent forms and all that was really hard. Tricky. I feel like I should do it. We need to do it again.
Yeah.
Maybe find some models that are easy to like, that can follow instructions, the parents approve. Like videos for, that would make it a lot easier.
Right. Yeah. So like with these video modeling, there's like different formats of them. So like you could have like simple video models where it's just like a couple like 2-3 actions and 2-3 sentences and just a very short video model. Or you can have like the whole story is like acted out like in scenarios, but those are tricky to find.
Yeah.
Like those resources don't totally exist yet.
And I went on YouTube and like right before we like started searching this, and I just wrote social stories for like going to the dentist. And what was kind of I didn't see any video models, but I saw a lot of like social stories just being read aloud. So I wonder if a lot of like the resources just look like that. Right.
I think they do. So it's like, it's the same one that we're thinking of, but just in a video form, which is beneficial in a sense, like because it makes it more accessible to families, but it's like we're not getting to that like video model.
No.
Some things that I've done in the past is if a child has like some skills that we're working on at the center and they're mastering them. I don't know if you've ran into this. Your child is mastering skills at the center, but then the parents like, oh my gosh, they will not do that at home. Like they are really struggling. I'll use the learner themselves to create their social story.
That's amazing.
It has to be a learner who has these like learning. They're at that stage in learning where they can like follow those instructions and kind of like model it out for you. But I've had a learner who like they really loved like taking pictures of themselves and watching videos. So we would like take videos of them completing like the tasks at the center, and then they would show them that at home, and they were able to like replicate that as their video model or their video social story.
It's amazing, and I love that idea. I feel like I've never thought of it. I'm definitely going to use it going forward.
I hope so. Yeah. So when you're like working on social stories, what do you typically think of?
I feel like I typically think of like, the written book.
Okay. Yeah.
And like I've always feel like some things I've started doing is like for games and stuff specific. I've been YouTubing like the game. Like I wanted to teach like one of my clients to play Red Rover. So I just YouTubed Red Rover. Yeah. And I found like young kids just like telling the rules and acting out the games with themselves. So that's what I'm thinking of when I like think of video social modeling. Stories.
Yeah. See, I like to shift sometimes. Like I think video social stories are really great, but I think that what I enjoy more is just like that video model as a learning tool more than the social story itself. Because when you think of videos, a lot of our learners love their tablets. They love YouTube. So it's something that they are generally already interested in. So getting them to like look at the screen is much easier. So I use like a video model. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a written out story.
And I think that's where it gets a little confused, because when we think of social stories, we're like, oh, well, we need to use that like same like that language and put it in the story, versus like with the video model, it just could be like the scenario acted out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there are benefits to both, and that's why our treatment in ABA, like we want
individualized.
It's so individualized. We really want to focus on that. So like some learners might benefit best from a written out social story, but other learners might need a video model instead.
And I think about how many times, I don't know how many times you've been at the center and you've written like a written social story, and how many times it gets lost.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Where like I have coverage technicians and they like misplace it, and then the next day they come in, they're like, well, has anyone seen it? And then getting it printed and laminated again is hard.
Oh my gosh, the material, the loss of materials is one of my biggest.
The big barrier.
It's the barrier to me. It's a barrier to the family. It's a barrier to the technician.
Yeah. And it's even harder, I feel like, when I send a social story home.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Like the dog ate it.
I'll be like,
sibling
keep
did
it in
something
their backpack. And it's like, I look in the backpack.
Lost. So I feel like
there.
When you have it on your phone or on your tablet, you can use it anywhere.
Yes.
And like, you're not losing it. The chances of you losing it are very slim, unless it gets deleted and then deleted again.
And it's like, but you'll always have a backup.
Yeah.
The BCBA.
Which is and it's easy to send. You don't have to laminate it. You don't have to print it out.
Right.
You're like, okay, you lost it here. Let me just email it to you again.
Yeah. No, I do like having like the video model on the phone and then even like that social story. Like that's the benefit of the day and age we're living in is we have technology. So let's utilize it to our advantage. We have
all of these tools that are here to our benefit. Well, we were doing some of the research, right?
Yes.
Like I was like, what resources are there for like families? Mm-hmm. And one interesting thing I was like, was that sofa.
Oh my gosh,
did you read the sofa article, app, right? Yeah. So there's an app called the Sofa, and it's supposed to be
in theory,
it's supposed to make the writing social stories and accessing social stories a lot easier.
Right.
But when I downloaded it.
So what did you find the barriers to using the app were?
Well, I felt like it lagged a little, which like whatever. It's like under construction probably.
Technology,
but it was like a little boring, like, you know, and I felt like I thought I was going to get an app with like cool animate, like it's an app.
Yes.
So I thought there would be like animation, stuff
even
like that.
clip art, like individualized clip art and stuff.
And you know, it wasn't. It was kind of boring.
Oh, I'm sad.
It's funny. Let me like pull up like what the data showed, right?
Right.
The implications or the findings were that it highlighted the benefits of digital stories over traditional methods due to its accessibility, customization options, and the ability to collect valuable user data to improve intervention strategies.
Okay.
But, you know, when I downloaded it, I didn't feel that way. But, you know, I trust our data.
The data's valid.
Data's valid. So I wonder if even just writing like social stories like on apps and stuff.
That's what I was going to say. So like maybe there's a way that we can like replicate the way that the Sofa app, the theoretical way that it was supposed to be used, like maybe using Canva. Can you talk about like when you use Canva, how you best format your social stories for your learner?
Yeah. I make it a PowerPoint because I feel like when I make it a PowerPoint, it prints easy.
You can print it in multiple
pages. I can make it any size I want. I can make it a full page, or I can make 4 slides to 1 page where it's like maybe this size.
Yeah.
And then I feel like after that, wait, where was I going with this?
Canva. How do you use Canva? What are your strategies?
So those are my key strategies. And then I'll try to like make it fun, exciting. Try to use like clients' favorite colors. Yes. Try to use real pictures. Mm-hmm. I do, like I mentioned before, like the numbers on the bottom if they're interested in numbers. If I'm writing like about stuff like no, like the word no, or like no, don't do that. That's not good. I try to use the color red.
Yeah,
for like the font.
It's like a prompt.
It's a prompt. Like red is no, like stop. Mm-hmm. And then I try to use green sometimes for like the things I want them to learn.
I like that. So you're individualizing like the phrasing, and then that probably draws the the learner's attention to it, but the reader too, so that they know like to emphasize. Like if you're sharing it with a parent, they can now know like this is how to emphasize this area. Yep.
And I do like the bold sometimes, like read this like that. Some other things I will do is I try to keep the font really simple. Yeah. And on Canva, you can get real wild.
You can get wild, but we don't need to. This isn't the time. Let's keep the font simple. What we want to get across is those images because that's what's going to draw the learner in. And we want to like focus on the simplicity of the language and the font as well.
Do you have any suggestions for when you do it? I feel like you're good at this. You're like a social story queen.
I love social stories. Honestly, I've learned a lot of my tips from, we've mentioned Jenny before.
Wow, we need Jenny just on.
We just need to bring Jenny on once. So she was a student and created a social story for me at one point on flying in the airplane.
Oh, she like can Photoshop, guys. She like will Photoshop the kid in?
So there was like an airplane and it has like the 4 windows and then there's like a little circle and she put the client's face in the circle and it was like he was flying in the airplane. And so I've learned a lot from her. I always joke with her that she should like just start selling them on Teachers Pay Teachers because her social stories are just fantastic.
I honestly, speaking on her still, like I remember she wrote a social story for like going to bed.
Yeah.
And she she had like the nighttime sky with like stars, and like in the moon she put like the little client's head.
That's really
like,
cute.
I know. I was like, we used to look at it and just like, how cute is that?
So yes. So I learned a lot from her. Like she made me one as she was working on like a student project for me. And so then I like took it. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to duplicate this for my other like social story. So now I'll start doing that. So in Canva, you can select like shapes to fill with an image. So I will always now put the client's face into the social story.
We should, you know what we should have her write a task analysis on how to use Canva to do this.
You know what? That'll be a resource that we'll put in the description below. I think it's a great idea. So I like to do that. I too like to individualize the language. Something that I think gets not really thought about is like, let's not make this story super long and lengthy. Yeah. Like to get your point across.
It doesn't need 15 pages.
No, I usually keep it between 4 and 5 because that's what my learner is going to attend to. Right. And like I try and keep 1 to 2 pages about preference, activities, and items. And then like, then I'll get to like the learning topic if that's like the hard part of flying in an airplane or like the negative part of being in the potty. Like I don't want the negativity to like overwhelm the whole story. Like I want to have some preference in there because we're trying to pair this activity and the learner with like the concept itself and their preferred activities too.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
All right. So
I have a code word.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I have my second code word is going to be dentist. I've written so many stories about dentists.
How do you promote your like social stories, or how do you train parents to implement social stories at home?
Yeah, so I typically will start, like I'll make social stories for my families initially. So I will make the social story and I try to bring parents into a training or a parent meeting where they observe the, like either me or the technician utilizing the social story. But my ultimate goal is to work myself out of a job. Like my thought is that I'm not always going to be in this learner's life. So I
can't always write these social stories for them.
I'm not always
something that works for them.
Yes, exactly. So I'm not always going to be there to write the social story for them. So I try and teach parents like how I write social stories. So I will help with them like learning how to use Canva or PowerPoint. Because when you make social stories, yes, Canva is a great tool. That's what I love to use. But you can use PowerPoint. You can use like pictures and just write them yourself. So I try and like promote ways that they can write them at home.
Right.
And help generalize them. I also will show families like on YouTube. Like I know that it's not the most individualized social story, but on YouTube you can find like different topics, whether that be like coping strategies or like doing a challenging task, like going to the dentist or potty training. Like you can find some basic social stories.
Things that can grow with them as they get older, like going to the grocery store, paying at the grocery store, stuff of that sort.
So I find those things on YouTube. So I show parents where to find these resources so that they can utilize them when I'm hopefully not there for them. Right. Like they graduate from us and I want them to be able to use these resources still.
And it's important that the parents know that there should be a clear objective to the social story too, right?
Yes.
You know?
So yeah, can you speak a little bit on that for the parents?
We want to make sure that you have a clear objective, meaning you're either like teaching a new skill, you're working on like showing them what the new environment may look like, stuff of that sort.
Yes. So like the learning, like you said, the learning objective has to be clear. So what you are trying to gear this towards, that should be the main focus, and it has to like be within that story.
Right. All right. And then do you feel like you train them on where to find the resources, kind of how to read them?
To the learner, when to use them. So like I'll write it within my behavior plan as like one of my behavior plan goals for parents a lot of times.
It should be the proactive strategy.
Is a proactive strategy. So parent will introduce social story once per day for 5 days in a row or whatever as reported by parent so that they know how to use the social story throughout the day. We don't have to be providing
and we don't need to listen to it every 5 minutes either.
I was going to say, like, don't present it 30 times a day because then it's going to become aversive.
Right.
So, like, I'm teaching them, like, when to use it and how to use it, how to create their own, and then where to find other resources because sometimes you don't have time to, like, write a whole social story.
Yeah,
we did say it's a resourceful
especially if you got
activity.
a busy life.
Exactly.
All right. So before we end, what's your favorite social story, Ben, that you've written or that you've read?
My favorite social story that I have written, I did one on sharing toys with a sibling, and I really liked that one. My learner really enjoyed it. It had him and his brother in it. So he liked, like, and he labeled him and his brother's name, and like it had all toys that they really enjoyed in there. So it was just really fun. The learner was really interested in it. So I liked that one.
My favorite one was writing one about going to the airport and riding an airplane, because the parents actually got to go, like in our area, we have the airport event where families can go beforehand.
I love that one. What's it called?
I forget what it's called.
Because I feel like it's coming up in the next few weeks.
We'll link it down below.
Yes, because there's one in Michigan.
So I had the family go to that before, and they took pictures of everything in the plane and in the airport, and then they sent it to me, and I put it in their social story.
I really
so he was
love
like,
that. That's so
he
cute.
was so ready by the time it was time to go,
and
he like
had
took
a
his little book
fantastic
with
flight.
him. He was so excited.
That's so cute. I love that.
All right, and then one last code word before we end, right?
Our final code word for the day is actually plane ride. It goes hand in hand with your story.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want your CEU credits, go to our website at blossomchildrencenter.com.
Talk to you later.
See you.